Hello and welcome to the third in my series, 7 Ways to Uncover Your Greatest Gifts and Your Deepest Soul Purpose. And today's video is about something that I've had an interesting journey with, let's say. So it's on the topic of what I've described as a personality type, but that doesn't really do it justice. I couldn't really come up with a good kind of catch-all term, but what I'm going to be speaking about are things from, I don't know, we could say Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, right up to things like astrology and gene keys. So quite a broad mix of ways of attempting, I guess, to understand ourselves better. And as I say, I've had an interesting journey with these kinds of technologies, ranging from being obsessed, absolutely obsessed by some of them and thinking they are kind of the answer to everything. And at other points, being quite dismissive and even judgmental at looking at ourselves through these lenses. And where I am now is what I'm going to share with you is I've really understood, both personally, but also very much in the work we do at Wake in the Wild, how these and many of these, not even just choosing one, many of these different ways of understanding ourselves can actually be incredibly illuminating. And very much taking us from seeing these, again, I'm just going to, for simplicity, call them personality typing methods, as a limitation to an illumination. So if we start from the place that we can relate to these kinds of things from, it can be very much a sense of, okay, now I know this about myself. And again, it could be any number of these different things. That means there is a right way for me to be, and I need to stay within it. And from that lens, these can become very much a limitation of boxing in, where it's like, okay, well, as an Enneagram 7, which is actually what I am, funny enough, it came up in conversation with a client earlier, I have a tendency to be very kind of like flitting from thing to thing, life and soul of the party, very spontaneous, gets bored easily, doesn't like things to be too serious. And from that lens, that can become this sense of, well, that's the only way for me to be. And therefore, anything that doesn't allow me to be that way isn't right for me. And it can be very much this a kind of almost like a suit of armor that we then need to kind of like, okay, so because I'm an Enneagram 7, to be a good Enneagram 7, I need to fit this particular Enneagram 7 shaped armor. And I'm just using the Enneagram. We could apply the exact same way of being to, as I say, gene keys, human design, Myers-Briggs, astrology, you name it. And again, I will admit, at points in my life, I absolutely have related to some of these in that way. And again, there's also another way we can be, well, we can feel like we're kind of like beyond it. Particularly, this is true if you come from a more kind of ascension spirituality form, which I have. It can seem as though these things are either just very simplistic and don't at all reach the kind of depths and heights that we can kind of know ourselves, particularly if we're looking at it through that lens of like there is no self, and we're looking at kind of, well, ultimately it's all about oneness, non-duality. Therefore, why on earth would we trying to create these and even more kind of double down illusionary forms of separation in this, like, I'm this type, you're this type. So wherever you've been on that spectrum, I completely understand it. I have absolutely been there too, and have also witnessed many, many, many students over the years with similar relationships to these things. And what we've discovered over those years, and particularly through the lens of the work we do, which is really allowing people to return to their soul and then often live from that place in terms of the work they do. These technologies, these ways of understanding ourselves can actually be incredibly powerful lenses. allowing us, and again, this is so much about the relationship we have to them. And so that requires us to hold them more lightly, not see them as a thing that we need to fit ourselves into, but more, again, a kind of lens that we can look through, like hold them much more lightly. And from that place, it is incredible what they can open us up to. And they really can bring, real relief. We can allow ourselves to recognize, like, okay, so this particular pattern that I'm in now makes sense. Now I can understand it from that lens. Doesn't mean necessarily that I have to, if it isn't something that is serving me and is aligned, I have to sort of stay stuck there, but at least gives me an understanding of why that's been the way it has been. Particularly human design and gene keys, understanding the shadow or not self of different aspects of our gene keys and human design really can provide that sense of like, okay, that's why I've been kind of like in that way of being. And I can also see that I can move forward from that into something beyond it. Another really good example of that is our Incarnation Cross in human design, where again, we can see that as like, this can be seen as almost like our role or our purpose in life, and can be taken again very seriously and very, very much from a limiting perspective, and looked at from a like surface level point of view. Sometimes it can seem quite shallow, let's say, like almost like a bit like obvious. And the more we're prepared to, again, be on this much deeper journey of understanding our unique soul, more and more we see there's like depth to that too. And so there's a client at the moment that we have in Mythical who very much had that relationship to her Incarnation Cross, where she saw it as something very like shallow, like, really, can this be what my whole life is about? And as she's journeying deeper and deeper into the truth of her soul, she's realizing that what she had seen in the Incarnation Cross was actually something so beyond what she was able to see when she was looking at it from where she was. Again, the deeper we go, the deeper we can see ourselves in these different methods. Another thing that I find very magical about looking at life through all of these different lenses is the way that we'll start to see connections and commonalities and dots being joined between them. And so, or other things that we've seen. And an example of that is, and this is just an example, I could give you many, many, many. For many years now, I have had this very clear sense of my deepest devotion is union. That's really what everything I do is in service of, creating union between opposites, union between polarities, whether that be masculine, feminine, whether that be between the human and the soul. All that I do is in service and is in devotion to union. And then when I had my astrological chart done last year, it turns out that I have 5 planets in Libra, which is that is the kind of like sign. It's obviously the scales, it's about balance, but it's also very specifically the house is about that kind of like connection with other, union, in other words. And I have 5 planets in it, which is unusual, I'm told. I don't know much about astrology, and so please forgive me if I'm saying anything that doesn't sound quite right. If you know a lot about astrology, hopefully you can understand the broader sense of what I'm saying. But according to what I understand, having 5 planets in one house isn't typical, and they happen to all be in the house that directly relates to something I already knew about myself. And we'll see again these commonalities between different things and also other things that we already know about ourselves. Interestingly, that number 7 that I just mentioned also shows up in all sorts of other places in my life. It's also my numerology number, for example, and it's also my Enneagram number. And so this is another way that we will just magically, through completely different systems that have no reason to have an overlap like that, we'll start to see these like golden threads joining different aspects of ourselves viewed through these lenses. Is there anything else I think might be helpful to know? And again, you may well know that human design and gene keys, and also the I Ching and also astrology are all in, you could say, kind of built on the same base. They're built on the same underlying first principles. And so it can be, if we're interested in one, we feel that call to one, it can be really beautiful to look at kind of the same thing from similar lenses, different, and they'll bring different things, but they sometimes allow us to illuminate something that we saw through a different lens. But there's something about, and again, I often look at, move, like if I'm working with a client, I'm looking through a human design and gene keys lens. I have both charts open and move back and forth between the two, because one will illuminate something that the other perhaps isn't as clearly in that moment. And that can be so powerful. And particularly, I notice there's aspects of our gene keys chart that at different points in our life is like really important to focus on. It might be a certain point in our life's work or our purpose. It's just so, of that moment, allowing us to see something more deeply about ourselves and what we're being called to. And again, ultimately, so much of the work we do is supporting people to actually like do their soul work, be their medicine in the world. And that's where some of these things can be so informative. So again, looking at my human design, I've had several human design readings over the years, and it's something I'm actually very familiar with myself, but it's something, again, we get from having that reflection from others. And in the recent reading, the human design reader was talking about my conscious sun gate. So if you're familiar with human design, that's the number on the right-hand side if you're looking at the chart, top right. And the way she described mine, she did it in a different way to how I've heard it described before. And she was describing it as, I have access to the Akashic records. It's an ability to receive information that's kind of beyond the human, beyond the known. And it was a really interesting, whether or not you want to take those things literally and believe those actual things are exactly how it is. That's not really even what I'm asking, you or me to receive this as. It's more an illumination of something that I would say is recognizing that we as humans can be very inclined to kind of like grasp onto the known and so that we're safe. It's a completely understandable human thing. And so much of my life has been recognizing that I actually operate a lot out of the known, which has been a really difficult journey for me at various points, where so much of my way of being is actually very open and very uncertain. And the way that she talked about this really allowed me to see more deeply than I've seen before that this actually is my life's work. So much of what I'm here to do is to be a channel for the mystery, for the unknown, for myself, then ultimately for the people who come to awaken the world. So again, just a personal example of that. I've seen examples like this over and over again that really allow us to just have that next part on our soul path illuminated. So if you are hearing something and everything I've shared, my invitation to you is, as ever, first, just trust what you are feeling, trust your own sense of knowing, and recognize that maybe it's time for you to, maybe just pick one of those different types of personality typing methods and use it as a lens to see what it is that you're being called to in terms of understanding your soul and what you're here to do. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time in my series of 7 ways to uncover your greatest gifts and your deepest soul purpose. So much love. Mwah. Bye-bye.